top story, China is raising the stakes in its bitter trade war with the United States.
Now, it's planning to impose heavy tariffs of $60 billion worth of U.S. imports on the 1st of June. That's despite warnings from U.S. President Donald Trump.
The latest Chinese tariffs increase comes after Trump's administration significantly increased tariffs on Beijing goods last week Friday. China announced on Monday it would impose higher tariffs on a range of U.S. goods, including frozen vegetables and liquefied natural gas. The finance ministry in Beijing said in a statement a total of 5,140 U.S. products will be subject to additional tariffs of 5%, 10%, 20% and 25% starting June 1st. The move widely expected after the United States last week raised tariffs of $200 billion in Chinese imports, heightened fears the world's two largest economies were spiraling into a no-holds-barred dispute that could derail the global economy. Trump has accused Beijing of reneging on commitments it made during months of trade negotiations, which Beijing has denied.
And for more on this story, we joined via Skype by international relations expert, Professor John Stremlau. Very good evening to you, Professor. Thank you so much for joining us now. U.S. President Donald Trump has rattled the World Trade Order by imposing unilateral tariffs to combat what he calls unfair trade practices by China, the European Union and other major trading partners of the United States. Can it get any worse?
Well, it certainly can get worse, and it could affect negatively South Africa as collateral damage in this. So it's an alarming development, but at the same time, it's typical Donald Trump. He's playing for the galleries, he's playing for attention, and he is also betraying his ignorance of trade. He said that the Chinese would be paying for all of these tariffs, which in fact are an effective tax on the American consumers, as his chief economic advisor, Larry Caldwell, tried to make clear on a Fox interview yesterday. So Fox News interview yesterday. So that what we're trying to look at right now is this brinksmanship. And there is still a 2-week window for the Chinese and the Americans to reach an agreement. And we all hope that they do. But the consequences could be grave because Trump could miscalculate and so could the Chinese.
I mean, what are the implications for this? How much of an impact could this have on global growth?
Well, it could have not only an impact on global growth, but an impact on South Africa's growth, which is barely at 1% right now. And, you know, South Africa exports a lot of commodities into China. If the Chinese economy, which is shaky to some extent, it's still growing strongly, 6%, but it's still is overextended in a lot of ways. And that would cut demand for primary commodities for South Africa, which would hurt our foreign exchange accounts very badly. And then there's the risk of a downturn in the United States, which has been having a strong recovery since Obama's overcoming the financial crisis a decade ago. And it would affect automobiles because consumers would buy less, it would be higher priced, and that would be a problem. And they would have less money in their pockets because they're paying these tariffs. You must be aware that the Chinese take a long view, and I suspect that these products that they're targeting are very carefully selected for the constituencies in Trump's base politically, because Trump is making this a political issue right now, just as he did the wall and immigration with Mexico. Trade and immigration are his two big issues, and he's sort of making this much more of a cause célèbre than he need to.
I mean, international institutions, including the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund, have warned that the consequences of this conflict could include growing economic nationalism. But then one wonders why the WTO in particular isn't engaging both countries to bring them to arbitration or even adjudication.
I'm sorry, but my Skype did not produce the voice, and so I didn't hear the question. I just would like to add perhaps that Rob Davies, the Minister of Trade and Industry, makes a very important point about trade with China and the U.S., and that is that this is, in a sense, it's not his term, a phony war. This is a contest with Trump at the center of the debate and trying to be strong-armed. But what we'll see in the longer term is a U.S.-China competition that could hurt South Africa over the fourth industrial revolution, artificial intelligence, data, digitation, robotics. There's some very, very big issues here, and this should be done in a multilateral forum, and Trump has refused to do that. He likes to do these things mano a mano, one-on-one, and that's not the way you do trade in this modern world of interdependence.
You know, Professor, this conflict is obviously challenging the traditional ways of solving trade disputes. One then wonders why the World Trade Organization perhaps isn't engaging both China and the United States onto the negotiation table for issues of maybe solving this matter through arbitration or even adjudication.
That's a very good question because Trump does not believe in multilateralism, and he's used an escape clause in declaring this a national security issue, which is phony. And the world trading regime needs to be reformed. China goes in, as Rob Davis has pointed out, from South Africa, China goes in and claims it's a developing country still, which is a self-designation that you're allowed under WTO rules. That's out of date. Pressure could be brought to the Chinese to be more forthcoming on intellectual property, more forthcoming on how they set their prices, and be more transparent and accountable. Those are long-term, very complicated, but they require multilateral agreements. In South Africa, now that it's had a successful election, and now that Cyril Ramaphosa, who's very much informed on international issues, I know he's got a big domestic agenda, but that he could help to push through the G20 and through the African cooperation. You know, South Africa has got to regain its leadership role in Africa now, so that the Free Trade Association in Africa can be meaningful and push against the kind of unilateralism that Donald Trump is making his signature issue. This is not at all helpful.
Remember that last year, President Trump introduced tariffs on $200 billion in Chinese goods last December. And that hike, Professor, I'm sure you will remember that it triggered a brief slowdown in the Chinese economy. I'm sure China must have considered this. And if not, I mean, how much of an impact would it have on the Chinese economy? And bearing in mind that most of the third world countries heavily rely on that economy.
Well, the latter point is certainly true, and that, you know, the Chinese economy is not as transparent. It's kind of market-based Leninism because it is an authoritarian regime, and so you don't have the free flow of information that we have here in South Africa about its economy and its challenges that gains citizen engagement. So that we really have a difficult time dealing with China. All countries do. But it's a very serious player. Its Belt and Road Initiative that South Africa has been involved with is very positive for Africa, I think, overall. And what we deserve to have is competition between the U.S. and China that is open and allows South Africa and other stakeholders to pick and choose who they're going to deal with under what terms. We just don't want to have one country, whether it's China or the United States, unilaterally pushing itself around the planet. You want to have the kind of multilateralism that South Africa is most famous for. It's very difficult to do, and with all the other demands, it's hard for governments to muster the necessary expertise. But South Africa has played a very constructive role internationally in the past, and I hope it will again, in order to make this regime work, but not concede to Donald Trump's unilateralism.
As a countermeasure, don't you think that Beijing may then be forced to come up with with a new stimulus package?
Well, the Chinese do play a long game, and I would think that they would find right now, as a matter of national pride, but also a practical consequence, targeting the constituencies within Trump's domestic base that really do cause him heartburn, because he is in a weak position domestically. He's using this trade dispute, in my view, to attract attention from the various investigations going on to his financial dealings, as well as the Mueller report on whether he obstructed justice or not. You've got a Democratic Congress. He's heading into the next campaign as an unpopular president, but one who is going to fight tenaciously, and he's using this trade issue like he uses the wall with Mexico to gin up domestic support. Personally, I don't think it's going to work, but the Chinese know this, and the Chinese will play into this game, as best they can, and they're very skillful.
All right, Professor, we thank you for your time. We appreciate it. That was Professor John Stremlau. He's an international relations expert. Now, this is The Globe on SABC News. Let's take a short break now.